If thoughts of a younger, gender-fluid Dan Aykroyd smashing in the face of a psychopathic clown while a passive-aggressive African-American homosexual, or a path-aggressive spookamo for short, desperately tries to slide into his DMs, makes your gland expand right now in your hand, or if the prospect of looting a mall while punching endless hordes of defenseless white folk in the back of the head without having to worry about those pesky police calling your mama calling your baby's mama, and then having to stab that lying biatch in her delicious dependent developing snooch to remind her who exactly wears the pants around his ankles in this relationship, titillates you in a way that, if a shy turtle titillated you in that way, you'd stop at nothing to get it to come out of its shell and onto the small of your back. Then boy oh boy, do I have the perfect game for an incredibly idiosyncratic individual like yourself. Hey everybody, it's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today, because George Romero's estate never quite figured out how to enforce their copyrights against a certain peoples chosen by God to bite the tips off the rest of us, while never actually tipping at restaurants themselves, we're gonna pull up a seat around the red-hot glow of an Xbox 360 struggling to render 50 zombies at once, while it simultaneously produces the same vacuous sound I often hear in my head whenever a woman begins to speak. Then discuss everyone's favorite decline of the American Dream Simulator, Dead Rising. This existential foray into the rotting core of capitalism begins with our protagonist Frank West hitching a helicopter ride across the scenic plains of Willamette, Colorado, and its as to yet unexplained military cordons, in order to kill some time and pretty much everything else at the Willamette Mall. You see, Frank is not some run-of-the-mill, unpaid BuzzFeed freelancer who blogs hot-take opinion pieces from the edge of the decades-old twin mattress strewn about the floor of his mother's basement, while pretending not to hear her in the kitchen, struggling to hold back her shameful tears as she unloads his butt plugs from the dishwasher. This big brick swinging mother lover embeds himself in war zones deeper than a bra strap on a fat chick in order to claim his juicy scoopies. And what at first appears to be a garden variety Black Lives Matter protest, peppered with an impromptu rooftop meeting of homosexual Muslims, becomes the most dangerous visit to a mall since they started busing in unidentified urban youth from the unidentified urban youth neighborhoods. Further into the mall, Frank joins a multicultural group of survivors whomst banded together, that is, until this typical Hillary voter mistakes the invading hordes of mindless zombies for doctors, lawyers, berry acquisition experts, and future Democratic voters, and, in a desperate struggle for the noodle of her poodle, she tears down the barricades and is eaten for the first time since she dropped acid and took 47 good cocks at Woodstock. Frank then leaps into action, displaying how he keeps in shape with a whole different kind of bench press, and escapes into what I like to call the nope zone. In the safe room, the black cop Brad, or Blow Pad for short, struggles against his natural inclinations as a policeman to shoot himself, a black man, as he pulls out his wallet to show Frank his badge, and also has to struggle against his natural urges as a black man to steal that same wallet from a cop. The delicious Jessica then offers Frank the perfect opportunity to show off some spicy prick pics before personally providing all in attendance with frothing fresh jugs of hot milk. Otis, whose names I can only assume is an acronym for Old Talkative Idiot Shut Up, gives Frank a transceiver so that Otis can fulfill his role as a typical boomer by holding back progress, since players literally cannot do anything while Otis is blathering to them via the transceiver. Otis then welds shut the door to the safe room, and Frank departs via an air duct in order to follow his leads and to seek out other survivors. Immediately beyond the relative asylum of the safe room walls, scrupulous players will find a humongous chungus among us, in the form of a stereotypical pederast Jeff and his John Denver-looking wife Natalie. These two caloric black holes were apparently far too fluffed up with flapping folds of fetid flesh to fly the final 50 feet to the safe room on their own. And observant players will struggle to hold down their lunch upon realizing that, during their disgusting smooch, Jeff is technically kissing every sandwich Natalie has ever eaten. A cutscene in the storage room below reveals that the problems in Willamette, as with all modern dilemmas, stem from a breed of wormy bug men whose heads explode when their matriarchy is dissolved by, yes, slaying their queen bees. Frank then swings a fire extinguisher at Jessica while attempting to douse the fire in her loins, blissfully unaware that, when she told him her panties were burning, she meant that she was suffering excruciating gonorrhea pains, rather than some quaint figure of speech alluding to amour. As a result, and as is normal for a white woman in a frightening situation, Jessica sprains her delicious cankle, and, unfortunately for Frank, he misses the perfect opportunity to quip that not only has he covered wars, but also whores, and that since, like his film, Jessica is so well developed that he'll cover her with a film of his very own, then follow up by romantically flopping his alabaster hat rack across her face like an AIDS-infested weasel of love, as we all do from time to time. Realizing that her place is in the home, popping out babies and catching the occasional open hand slap for talking out of turn, Jessie surrenders her gun to Frank and dispatches him towards the food court, and the miniature race war that ensues requires only a Jewish gentleman rubbing his hands together in the background to complete the deal. Though Frank's new foe tries to have it Carlito's way, resourceful players will tap into their inner Benny Blanco from the Bronx in order to realize that the deadliest thing in the food court is not the 5-year-old hummus at the Indian food stand, but rather a good old-fashioned long-distance tooth filling. Our festively festooned fugitive then breaks the laws of physics by ascending via a foot noose through the corrugated sheet metal ceiling, leaving one to assume that this is only possible due to Carlito's innate Mexican wall-crossing skills, and to him, ceilings are merely horizontal walls. From a certain point of view, Frank and Brad then engage in some typical buddy cop banter, ultimately deciding to work together in order to pin this bath salts epidemic on a random white dude who refuses to even talk to them until they've called for backup. At this point, the player has enough time to search out optional slow-talking retards, I mean survivors, who walk directly into enemies faster than a Swedish woman welcoming in hordes of disloyal religious fanatic invaders. Will kill each other and Frank if you give them anything more powerful than a pillow to wield, and get drive-by'd in the courtyard harder than an adorable black girl who just sang for President Obama 2 weeks earlier. Optional psychopaths that the player will inadvertently stumble into while searching for the next event flag include Kent, the typical art school dropout who thinks he's deep and introspective just because he knows how to slap a sepia-tone filter onto his entry-level garbage Instagram posts. He first challenges Frank to capture Kent's inner essence using photography, rather than Kent's usual usage of prostate stimulation and a jar. Then for Frank to shoot the ultimate lewd photograph, and finally, to immortalize the moment his photo-loving heart f-stops. Adam, also known as Clown Nuts, because he drove himself insane while trying to figure out how magnets work, and also because his nuts smell funny, attacks Frank for not laughing at his hacky prop comic routine, then falls onto his own chainsaws, recreating the horror of November 1999 when my dad tried to remove his genital warts with the electric carving knife at the Thanksgiving table, and I haven't been able to stomach lumps in my mashed potatoes ever since. ANCAP Master Cletus Sampson refuses to share his guns until you pry them from his cold dead fingers, which most players will happily oblige since shotguns completely break the game. Everyone's favorite dummy-thick, tuna fish-fingered Chris Chan impersonator Joe, whose name is subtly ironic once you realize that it is spelled J-O, which is something that she's never inspired a man to do, ties up a group of younger, prettier women in an attempt to indoctrinate them into the degenerate wine ant lifestyle. Fortunately for the ladies, Frank shows Joe that chainsaws always beat scissors, and sends Joe to the big Paul Blart Shart Mart in the sky. The Hall family snipers prove that the family that snipes together also wipes together, which I'm pretty sure is not legal on the continental United States. The leader of the True Eye cult seeks to either purge the world of its tainted blood or wipe the blood off his worldly taint. I'm not really sure which. He puts bitches in boxes like a Clinton packing a snack for a long flight, commits more unforgivable sins in a movie theater involving a green mask than Jamie Kennedy in Son of the Mask, and gets pricked in the eye harder than a manlet walking face first through a sauna. Machete-wielding war crime enthusiast Cliff Hudson flashes back to Vietnam so hard that he eventually loses a drawn-out battle against somebody infinitely less equipped for the fight than himself. And last but not least, this flaming creep took thoughts hostage after they walked in on him utilizing the chaos of the ongoing zombie outbreak to surreptitiously try on women's clothing for a bit of the old dress and caress. One of them disrespected his pronouns in a typical "it's ma'am" freak-out ensued. Now, bear in mind that while Frank was out there saving lives, doing to the insane what everyone should do to the insane, and searching for the truth behind the outbreak, Brad, the Department of Homeland Security officer, managed to gather a couple of bags of chips, some cans of room temperature grape soda, and allowed Carlos to snatch up Dr. Barnaby out from under his pudding pop shaped nose. A couple of pucks to the supple nuts of this chuckle fuck later, and like the American taxpayer, Frank becomes the proud sponsor of a dying old man who desperately needs his meds. While searching for these coveted aspirins, boner pills, and Flintstone chewable vitamins, our hapless hero happens upon a typical middle management moron with a god complex, a cart replete with some sweet street meat, and a rage so boundless, you'd think he just caught Frank eating 2 grapes without paying for them first. After Frank slaps him around like a wobbly shopping cart wheel, he wonders who will run his store after he dies. Well, to be perfectly honest, a couple of rooftop Koreans would have done a better job defending it. Just saying. As a reward for saving her life, our mestizo mademoiselle makes a run at murdering Frank with a motorcycle, though I could be mistaken and that's just how she drives, considering that she's a woman. After knocking her off her high seat and giving it a good old snifferoonie, this dulce de leche factory, Isabella, reveals that she is Carlito's sister and is later shot by him, and Frank is forced to carry her back to the safe house piggyback style, regretting that he won't be able to bend over backwards and sniff her residual punani perfume off the small of his own back every step of the way. Isabella and the old man reveal that the outbreak stems from an accident at the Santa Cabeza secret meat factory, which was, as a side note, my nickname in grade school, which really did make my job mopping up the floors that much more difficult, wherein the zombifying wasps were inadvertently created while attempting to mass-produce beef, and all the witnesses who survived the ensuing zombie outbreak were murdered during the cover-up. The conceit the developers of Dead Rising expect players to swallow at this point is that Isabella knows all of this because she served in the lab as a medical technician at the time. Yeah, Isabella, you were a doctor in Mexico, where one just has to dance around a hat 3 times in order to attain their PhD. Here in baby Jesus' blessed America, you fold towels for a living. So stop your yapping and get back to work rapido. My jizz stains aren't gonna boil themselves out of the drapes. Believe you me, I wish they would, Isabella. I wish they would. Finally succumbing to the uncontrollable osteoporosis-fueled need for vitamin D, Dr. Barnaby suddenly lunges for the milkies stored in Jesse's ballistics, and I can't even blame him since, frankly, I'd like to take a bite out of her too. Isabella then divulges that Carlito's last resort will be to utilize the rancid burrito farts he's been storing in jars his entire life to blow up the mall and send the zombifying bees into the atmosphere, where they will infect Zeppelin enthusiasts whom Carlito has hated his entire life. Always looking down at the rest of us common folk. Come down here this instant, and I'll show you precisely why they call me Mr. Beats people up and then licks every square inch of their body. It's, something I assume Carlito would say. I, for one, hold no ill will towards the blimp's enthusiast community, and I certainly do not have a pile of rotting, every square inch licked clean corpses wrapped up in popped balloon fabric in the clearing behind my tool shed. No, don't look. Luckily, Frank is able to acquire an explosion-proof shopping cart that has been reinforced by decades of caked-on hobo semen, and the blast intended to destroy the entire complex goes off 15 feet away from Frank, and the only damage sustained occurs when Carlito gives into his genetic predestination and gives Brad a bit of the old-fashioned Mexican jabby-stabby. Attempts to contact the Department of Homeland Security are thwarted by a jamming device which only Carlito knows how to disable. After Frank rescues him from a Mongolian mongoloid who was just about to put an egg roll up his butthole, Carlito uses his last dying breath to reveal the password of the jammer, get Frank to spread the truth of what happened in Santa Cabeza, and reaffirms every sensible person's deep-seated hatred of vegans. The DHS then responds to our hero's desperate plea for help by sending in a wet work team to wipe them all out faster than if they had interviewed Jeffrey Epstein in prison. Fortunately, Otis manages to distract them with a long, rambling story over the transceiver, just long enough to sneak out most of the survivors on a stolen DHS helicopter. Unfortunately, being a black man in the heat of the moment, Otis cannot help but attempt ghost riding his stolen whip and wound up as a passive-aggressive Spookamo smear on the landscape below. Well, depending on how the players has performed up to this point, a number of endings may play out. If all the relevant cases have been solved and Frank reaches the rooftop helipad in time for extraction, his fleeting hope for salvation succumbs to CHPS, also known as Capcom Helicopter Pilot Syndrome, and overtime mode begins, wherein Isabella drags Frank to safety off-screen, which may irk certain players at first, who wonder how such a frail and lickable lass could move such a stocky fellow. But my personal theory is that she transported Frank by scooting on the floor backwards while dragging Frank across the snail trail her front butt left behind. Within the certain relative safety of Carlito's hideout, it is revealed that Frank has been paused in his neg hole by the bees, and only injecting Frank with queenly hormones to make him a true trans can save him. After collecting a blender, first aid kit, magnifying glass, perfume bottle, camp stove, and 10 queen bees, Isabella cooks up an antidote and some delicious churros. It is then revealed that Carlos infected orphans with some larval bee spores and dispatched them to homes across America as human time bombs, just like all Mexican children brought into the US of A, but I digress. And before Frank can inform Isabella that she needs to go back, the power cuts out, leading Frank to discover a completely superfluous path that they can use to escape from the mall. At this point, the writers of Dead Rising foolishly attempt to convince the player that zombies are physically repulsed by Isabella's presence due to the anti-zombie pheromones she carries about in her Dora the Explorer thermos. When we all know that, like myself, Frank is just so rapaciously rugged that as soon as he touched Isabella's hand, she came and started queefing so hard that no zombie could bear the smell. Our heroes then traverse this underground railroad to a seemingly unfinished arena, wherein a cheeky game developer snuck in a thrilling recreation of what a Palestinian infant might see while peering out of his bassinet towards the rapidly approaching Israeli border, and Frankeldankles and faces down the man behind both the suppression of the events at the Willamette Mall and the slaughtering of the civilians of Santa Cabeza. In this dire dispute, players must either tap into their vast knowledge of bare-fisted melee attacks, watching for openings and keeping up their guard, or they can just repeatedly jump kick Brock to death as if he were some kind of fetus hiding like a coward within the womb. You know what I'm talking about. Brock receives his just desserts by becoming just desserts, and for the time being, Frank's journey comes to an end. Overall, Dead Rising is the most fun I've had at a mall, since I realized that I could tunnel through the septic tanks and utilize a sophisticated array of mirrors to peer into the ladies' room and whisper inspirational quotes through the pipes to help the ladies loose the juice from their papoose. And while some may view the events of Dead Rising with abject horror or disdain, we should thank Amazon for killing malls so that the tragedy of Willamette, Colorado can never happen for really reals. Only for play. Well, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, you can be a good consumerist zombie by clicking like, subscribe, and that little bell next to the subscribe button, since you aren't actually subscribed until you click it. Then utilize the links provided in the description of this video in the top pinned comment to join my Discord, where a cavalcade of inbred sister sniffers awaits you. Toss a gold doubloon at me on Patreon so you too can receive top secret updates on my latest projects and earn yourself a vote on the subject of my next video. Then check out one of my original ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks so you can finally tell people that you are a scholar and a gentleman without being a filthy liar. Or you can do none of those things and lick the back of your mother's kneecap after she jazzercises for a couple of hours. Go ahead, I'll wait. Until then, thanks for your time and goodbye!